My father neglected me for his golden child stepdaughter. I decided to return the favor. My dad and I were a team after Mom died. I was 14 and he was lost, but we figured it out together. He'd always say I was his whole world, and nothing would change that. Then he met Carol when I was 17. She seemed okay at first. She'd bring dessert when she came for dinner and asked about my college plans. She had a daughter named Megan who was 15. The first time I met Megan, she looked at our house and said it was smaller than she expected. She asked if we had a pool, and when Dad said no, she rolled her eyes and said her father's house had two. Carol laughed and said Megan was used to nice things. That should have been the warning. After Dad and Carol got married, they moved into our house. Carol said it made sense since we had more room than her apartment. What she didn't mention was that Megan would need the biggest bedroom for all her stuff. My room. The room Mom had painted purple for me. The room with the window seat Mom and I used to read in together. Dad said it was just a room and Megan needed space for her furniture. I moved into the guest room that was half the size. Megan filled my old room with expensive clothes and makeup and complained the closet was too small. She painted over Mom's purple walls with black because purple was childish. Megan made my life hell. She'd use my things without asking and break them. She broke my laptop and said it was old anyway. She lost my grandmother's necklace at a party and said I shouldn't have left it where she could find it. It was in my jewelry box in my room. She told everyone at school that my mom killed herself because she couldn't stand having such a boring daughter. That wasn't even true. Mom died of cancer. When I told Dad, Carol said Megan was just adjusting and I should be more understanding. Dad agreed and said we needed to be a family. Megan would eat the food I made for my lunch and leave me nothing. When I put my name on my food, she'd throw it away and say it looked expired. She'd delete my recordings on the TV for her reality shows. She'd tell Dad I was mean to her when he wasn't looking and Carol would back her up. Dad started believing them. He'd lecture me about being welcoming and say Mom would want me to be kind. The college fund was the breaking point. Dad had been saving for my college since I was born. Mom had life insurance that went into it too. I'd gotten into my dream school with a partial scholarship and the fund would cover the rest. 2 months before graduation, Dad sat me down and said Megan needed the money more. She hadn't gotten any scholarships and Carol couldn't afford her dream school. He said I was smart enough to get loans and work my way through like he did. He said Megan didn't have the same opportunities I had. I asked what opportunities those were. He couldn't answer. I worked 3 jobs through college while Megan posted photos from her sorority parties funded by my dead mother's money. Dad would like her posts and comment how proud he was. He never commented on my dean's list announcements. When I graduated, he didn't come because Megan had a dance recital the same day. Carol said family had to support each other. After college, I got a good job at an investment firm. I stopped going home except for major holidays. Even then, Megan would ruin everything. She'd mock my job and say anyone could move money around. She'd bring up embarrassing stories from high school that she'd make worse in the telling. She'd complain that I didn't bring expensive enough gifts while she gave nothing. Dad would just say that's how sisters act. Last month, Dad called and asked to meet for coffee. Just the 2 of us, which was strange. He said he had something important to discuss. He told me he was planning to formally adopt Megan. She was 25. He said it would make estate planning easier and show Carol he truly accepted Megan as his daughter. He wanted my blessing because he said I'd always be his real daughter, but Megan deserved to feel included. I asked if Megan knew about this. He said it was going to be a surprise for her birthday. I asked what Megan had done to deserve this. He listed things like she visited on holidays and posted photos with him online and called him Dad sometimes. I asked if he remembered when she threw away all Mom's photos because she said dead people were creepy. He said that was years ago. I asked if he remembered when she sold Mom's wedding dress online for concert tickets. He said Carol had handled that. I asked if he remembered missing my graduation for her recital. He went quiet. I told him he could adopt whoever he wanted, but I had something to tell him first. I'd hired a private investigator when Carol and Megan first moved in because something felt off. Carol had been married 3 times before. Every husband was a widower with money. Every marriage ended when the money ran out. Dad sits frozen across from me, coffee untouched, as I watch him process what I just told him about Carol's 3 previous marriages to widowers. His face goes pale and he opens his mouth twice before any words come out. He asks how I could possibly know this. I slide the folder across the table containing marriage certificates, divorce records, and financial documents Eve Larson compiled over the past 8 years. Dad's hands shake as he opens it. I explain I hired the investigator the week they moved in because something felt wrong about how quickly Carol pushed into our lives. Dad flips through pages showing Carol's marriage to a widower in Ohio that lasted 3 years until his savings ran out, then another in Michigan, then one in Pennsylvania. Each husband had lost his wife within 2 years of meeting Carol. Each had money from life insurance or inheritance. Each marriage ended when the funds were depleted. He pushes the folder away and says this has to be fake, that I probably hired some con artist who made this up because I never gave Carol a fair chance. The accusation stings, but I expected it. So I pull out my phone and show him the Facebook profiles of 2 of Carol's ex-husbands confirming the marriages and timelines. Dad stares at the phone screen for a long time before asking why I never told him this before. I remind him that 8 years ago I tried to tell him something felt off about Carol, and he accused me of being jealous and unwelcoming, so I learned to keep my mouth shut and document everything instead. He wants to know what I expect him to do with this information now. I tell him I don't expect anything, but I needed him to know the truth before he legally adopted Megan and made Carol's latest con official in the eyes of the law. Dad insists there must be an explanation, that maybe Carol had bad luck with previous marriages but genuinely loves him. I ask if he's noticed how Carol's been pushing him to update his will lately, and watch his expression change as he realizes she brought it up just last week. I explain that Carol's pattern is consistent across all 3 previous marriages: move in quickly, integrate her daughter into the family, isolate the husband from his biological children, drain the finances, then leave when there's nothing left to take. Dad argues that they still have plenty of money, so my theory doesn't make sense. I pull out bank statements I obtained through methods I don't explain, showing that the college fund that was supposed to be mine is completely empty, and Carol has been making large transfers to accounts in Megan's name for the past 5 years. Dad's face goes from pale to red as he sees the numbers. The statements show withdrawals of $5,000 here, $8,000 there, all coded as education expenses but happening long after Megan graduated. He demands to know how I got his bank records and threatens to call the police for invasion of privacy. I tell him to go ahead, that I work in finance and know exactly which records are legally obtainable and which databases are public information, and everything in this folder came from legitimate sources. Dad scrapes his chair back and stands up, the folder of evidence still open on the table between us. He needs time to think, he says, and can't process this right now. His hands shake as he gathers his jacket, fumbling with the zipper. I tell him to take all the time he needs. I won't be attending any adoption ceremony or pretending to be happy about him giving Megan legal rights to Mom's memory and legacy. He stops moving for a second and just looks at me. His eyes are wet, but no tears fall. He walks out without saying anything else, and I sit there alone with both our untouched coffees getting cold. 3 days pass with no contact. I check my phone more than I want to admit, waiting for his name to pop up. Work keeps me busy, but I catch myself staring at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers. On the 3rd night, my phone rings while I'm making dinner. Dad's voice sounds tired and strained when I answer. He wants to meet again. Different coffee shop this time, he says, across town where we're less likely to run into anyone we know. I agree, and we set a time for the next morning. The second coffee shop is smaller and darker than the first one. Dad is already there when I arrive, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. He looks like he hasn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, and his shirt is wrinkled like he pulled it straight from the laundry basket. He ordered me a coffee already, the way I like it with cream and 2 sugars. That small gesture catches me off guard. He admits he started going through old financial records at home. Carol thinks he's organizing files for tax season, so she hasn't asked questions. He found documentation of purchases he doesn't remember approving. Credit cards he didn't know existed, all in Carol's name but linked to his accounts. His hands shake again as he talks, and he keeps glancing at the door like he expects Carol to walk in. I ask if he confronted Carol about any of this. No, he says quickly, almost too quickly. He wanted to verify my information first before making accusations. The more he looks, the more irregularities he finds going back years. Charges that don't make sense. Withdrawals he never authorized. Statements for accounts he didn't open. He pulls out his own folder, thicker than mine was, stuffed with printed credit card statements. The papers are marked with yellow highlighter and sticky notes in Dad's handwriting. Dad spreads the statements across the table between our coffee cups. His finger traces down columns of charges at expensive stores and restaurants he never went to. Timeshares he didn't buy in places he's never visited. A car lease for a vehicle Megan drives that he thought was purchased outright 3 years ago. He's been paying monthly lease payments without knowing it, while Carol told him the car was a graduation gift they bought in cash. The total is over $80,000 in the past 3 years alone. His voice cracks when he says the number out loud. He asks what I think he should do. The question hangs in the air, and I realize this is the first time in 8 years he's asked my opinion about anything important. Not about Carol or Megan or money or family. Nothing. I suggest he consult an attorney before confronting Carol. If she's done this to 3 other men, she'll have strategies prepared for when someone catches on. She'll have explanations ready and ways to turn it around on him. He needs professional help to protect himself. Dad admits he's scared of being alone again. After Mom died, he felt like he was drowning, and Carol seemed like a lifeline. Someone who understood loss and could help him through it. someone who made the house feel less empty. His voice gets quiet and he stares at his coffee. I tell him I understand loneliness. I felt it too when he chose Carol and Megan over me. When he stopped coming to my school events and missed my graduation and forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. But loneliness is better than being deliberately bled dry by someone who sees you as a mark. Better to be alone than to be used. We sit in silence for a while. The coffee shop fills with morning customers ordering drinks to go. Dad watches them like he's trying to remember what normal life looks like. Finally, he asks if I can recommend an attorney. I give him Donald Larson's name. He specializes in estate law and has experience with financial exploitation cases. He's also Eve Larson's husband, so he's already familiar with the investigation details. Dad writes down the name and number on a napkin with a pen that barely works. The following week, Dad meets with Donald Larson. He calls me afterward from his car, still parked outside the attorney's office. His voice sounds shaken, worse than at the coffee shop. Donald confirmed that Carol's pattern matches classic financial exploitation. He's seen it before in other cases. The attorney recommended Dad secure his accounts immediately and consider legal separation to protect remaining assets. Change passwords, remove Carol's access, move money to new accounts she doesn't know about. Do it all before any confrontation because the moment Carol realizes he knows, she'll drain whatever she can reach. I ask if he's going to confront Carol or just quietly separate their finances. Dad says Donald advised securing everything first before any confrontation. Carol will likely drain whatever she can access the moment she realizes he knows. The attorney was very clear about that. Don't tip her off. Don't give her warning. Don't assume she won't act fast. Dad sounds scared now, really scared, in a way I haven't heard since right after Mom died. He asks if I think Carol would really do that, take everything and run. I remind him she's done it 3 times before to 3 other men. He goes quiet on the other end of the line and I can hear traffic passing in the background. Next week, Dad works with Donald to transfer funds to new accounts Carol can't access, remove her name from credit cards, and document all questionable transactions for potential legal action. He does this while maintaining normal behavior at home, which he says is the hardest acting job of his life. Every morning, he kisses Carol goodbye like nothing's wrong. Every evening, he asks about her day and pretends to care about Megan's latest drama. The whole time he's moving money, changing passwords, and building a legal case against the woman sleeping next to him. He calls me every other day from his car during lunch breaks, voice tight with stress, asking if he's doing the right thing. I remind him that Carol did this to 3 other men and would do it to someone else if he didn't stop her. The pretending lasts 9 days before something breaks. Carol discovers something is wrong when her credit card gets declined at an expensive restaurant. She comes home furious and confronts Dad about the accounts, demanding to know why her card isn't working. Dad plays dumb, says the bank must have made an error, promises to call them in the morning. But his voice shakes when he tells me about it later that night, and I can hear the panic underneath. Carol is suspicious now, demanding access to bank statements, checking accounts online, asking questions Dad can barely deflect. Donald advises him to accelerate the timeline and prepare for full confrontation within the next few days. They can't maintain the pretense much longer without Carol figuring out what's happening. Before Dad can work up the courage to initiate the conversation, Megan shows up at my workplace on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm leaving the building for a coffee run when I spot her standing near the entrance, looking uncomfortable and out of place in jeans and a hoodie. She keeps glancing around like she's worried someone will see her. When our eyes meet, she walks over quickly and asks if we can talk somewhere private. My first instinct is to say no and keep walking, but something about her body language stops me. She looks scared, not angry. We end up in my car in the parking garage, doors locked, engine off. The concrete walls make everything echo slightly. Megan sits in the passenger seat picking at her cuticles, not looking at me. She admits Carol sent her to feel out what I know and whether I'm planning to cause problems. The honesty surprises me. I ask why she's telling me this instead of just playing along with Carol's plan. Megan says she's tired of being Carol's puppet, that she's starting to realize her mother has been using her as a tool to manipulate men for years. Her voice gets quieter when she mentions that Carol has been pushing her to flirt with Dad's business partner, a recent widower, and it made her feel sick. The pieces are starting to click together for her in ways they never did before. I ask Megan directly if she knew about Carol's previous marriages and the pattern of financial exploitation. She stops picking at her cuticles and looks at me for the first time since we got in the car. She admits she knew Carol had been married before, but thought those relationships just didn't work out, that the men were jerks, or the timing was bad, or whatever story Carol told. She's only recently started questioning whether her mother's stories add up. Megan reveals that Carol has been pressuring her to get engaged to the business partner's son, someone Megan barely knows, and that Carol keeps talking about how much money that family has. She describes how Carol coaches her on what to say, how to act, what to wear around certain men. The realization is happening in real time as she talks, her face getting paler, her hands starting to shake. I watch her entire worldview crack and reform. She asks if I really have proof about Carol's previous marriages. I pull out my phone and show her copies of the documents from Eve's investigation. Marriage certificates, divorce records, financial statements showing the same pattern 3 times over. I watch Megan's face crumble as she scrolls through the evidence. Her entire childhood was built on her mother conning grieving widowers. She starts crying. Not pretty tears, but ugly sobbing that makes her whole body shake. She says she feels disgusted with herself for going along with it, for taking my college fund, for being cruel to me all those years. She knew something felt wrong, but she told herself it was fine because Carol said it was fine, and the money made life easier, and she didn't want to look too closely at where it came from. Megan's breakdown seems genuine, but I'm cautious because she's been manipulating people alongside Carol for 8 years. I've seen her lie to Dad's face, watched her fake tears to get out of trouble, witnessed her turn on the charm when she needs something. This could be another performance. I hand her tissues from my glove compartment and wait for the crying to slow down. When she can breathe normally again, I tell her that if she really wants to make things right, she needs to be willing to testify honestly about what she's witnessed if this goes to court. Real consequences, real testimony, real accountability. Not just an apology in my car and then back to business as usual. Megan looks at me with red eyes and asks what kind of testimony I mean. I explain that Dad is working with an attorney to protect himself from Carol, that there might be legal proceedings, that the truth about Carol's pattern needs to come out. If Megan wants to prove she's serious about changing, she needs to be willing to tell the truth even if it hurts Carol. Even if it means admitting her own role in everything. She nods slowly, wiping her face with the tissues and asks what she should do. She agrees immediately, and says she'll tell the truth about everything she knows, including Carol's coaching on how to make Dad feel guilty, and how to position herself as the daughter he always wanted. Her voice is steadier now, determined instead of shaky. Megan admits Carol specifically told her to mention her real dad's pool and nice things that first day we met, to make Dad feel like he couldn't provide enough. Carol coached her on acting disappointed with our house, with Dad's job, with everything, so he'd try harder to make her happy. She describes how Carol would rehearse conversations with her, practice facial expressions, plan out scenarios where Megan would need something expensive, and Dad would feel obligated to provide it. The whole thing was calculated from day one. Megan says Carol told her that widowers are easy marks because they're desperate to rebuild their families and prove they can make everyone happy. The clinical way Carol talked about it, like these men were just resources to extract, makes me feel sick. Megan pulls out her phone and shows me text messages from Carol with instructions on how to act around Dad, what to say when she wants something, how to play the victim if I complain about her behavior. The evidence is more extensive than I expected. She offers to forward everything to me, says she has years of messages saved. I give her my email and watch the files start transferring. This could change everything. 2 days later, Dad finally confronts Carol with all the evidence. He calls me from Donald's office afterward, voice shaking so badly I can barely understand him at first. He did it at home in the kitchen after Megan left for work. He laid out the folders on the table, the marriage certificates, the financial records, the timeline showing the pattern. Carol's face went blank for a moment like she was calculating her next move. She initially tried to deny everything, said the documents must be fake, accused him of being paranoid and letting me poison his mind against her. When Dad showed her the bank statements with her signatures and the transfers to Megan's accounts, Carol switched tactics. She said the previous marriages were complicated situations he couldn't possibly understand, that those men were abusive or controlling or had problems Dad didn't know about. She made herself the victim in each story, said she had to protect herself and Megan, said she did what she had to do to survive. The explanations got more elaborate and desperate as Dad kept pushing back with facts. When none of that worked, Carol finally got angry and accused Dad of being ungrateful after everything she's done for him. She listed all the ways she'd supposedly improved his life, made his house a home, given him a ready-made family, helped him move on from his dead wife. The way she said dead wife made Dad's blood run cold, like Mom was just an obstacle Carol had helped him get over. Dad recorded the confrontation on his phone per Donald's advice, and Carol's manipulation tactics become obvious when played back. Donald made him listen to it twice in the office, pointing out each shift in strategy. Carol cycles through tears, anger, accusations, and gaslighting in under 10 minutes. She goes from crying about how much she loves him to screaming about what an ungrateful bastard he is to trying to hug him and say they can work through this to threatening to take everything in a divorce. The recording captures all of it, her voice changing pitch and tone with each new approach, the calculated pauses, the strategic tears. Dad says hearing it recorded made him realize how many times she's done this before, and he just accepted it. How many arguments ended with him apologizing for upsetting her, how many times she twisted things around until he questioned his own memory and judgment. The recording is like watching a masterclass in manipulation, and it makes him physically ill to hear how easily he fell for it every single time. Donald says the recording will be useful if Carol tries to claim Dad is making false accusations or having mental health issues. Her own words prove the pattern. Carol moves out of the house within 24 hours, taking Megan with her. Dad comes home from work the next day to find half the furniture gone, Carol's clothes cleared from the closet, and most of the kitchen items missing. She didn't ask or negotiate, just took what she wanted while he was at the office. Megan texted me from Carol's car saying she tried to stay, but Carol wouldn't let her, practically dragged her out of the house with threats about what would happen if she betrayed family. Carol immediately starts calling Dad's friends and family with her version of events. She tells everyone that Dad is having a mental breakdown, that I've been manipulating him for years because I never accepted her, that he's making wild accusations based on fake documents his bitter daughter provided. She cries on the phone about how she gave him 8 years of her life, and this is how he repays her. She posts vague messages on social media about betrayal and family loyalty that her friends share and comment on with support. Within hours, Dad's phone is blowing up with messages from people who've known him for decades, asking what's going on, saying they're worried about him, suggesting he needs professional help. Some of them are openly hostile, accusing him of abandoning Carol when she needs him most. The speed and coordination of Carol's campaign is impressive in a horrible way. She's done this before, and she knows exactly how to control the narrative. Several of Dad's friends call me asking what's really going on. I recognize some of the names from Dad's stories over the years, people he's known since before Mom died. They're confused and concerned, caught between Dad's silence and Carol's dramatic version of events. I have to decide how much to share, whether to defend Dad publicly or let the legal process play out. Sterling Brooks, my colleague who's become a good friend over the past year, advises me over lunch to stick to facts and let the legal process play out, rather than getting into he said, she said arguments. He points out that anything I say now could be twisted and used against Dad later, that Carol is clearly skilled at manipulating public opinion, and that the truth will come out through proper legal channels. Sterling suggests I tell people that it's a private family matter being handled by attorneys, and I can't discuss details, which sounds reasonable without being defensive. I take his advice and start responding to calls and messages with a brief statement about legal proceedings and privacy. Some people accept this, others push for more information or openly side with Carol. It's painful watching people Dad has known for years believe Carol's lies without even asking for his side of the story. Carol shows up at my office building 3 days after moving out, trying to confront me in the lobby. I'm coming back from a meeting when I see her arguing with the security guard at the front desk. She's dressed up, makeup perfect, playing the role of concerned stepmother trying to reach her troubled stepdaughter. The security guard is explaining that she needs to call ahead and be added to the visitor list, but Carol keeps insisting it's an emergency, and she needs to see me right now. When she spots me coming through the door, she rushes over before security can stop her. She starts yelling about how I destroyed her family, how I turned Dad against her with lies, how I'm a vindictive brat who never grew up. Her voice echoes in the marble lobby and everyone stops to stare. Security moves to escort her out and Carol gets louder, screaming about how I've been jealous of her and Megan from day one, how I can't stand seeing Dad happy, how I fabricated evidence because I'm a spoiled child who can't share. 2 security guards take her arms and start walking her toward the door. She's still yelling, calling me names, threatening to sue me for defamation. My HR representative appears from somewhere and guides me to the elevators, getting me away from the scene. We go up to her office where she documents everything that just happened, has me write down exactly what Carol said, and helps me get a formal trespass warning issued. The whole incident is captured on the building's security cameras. My HR representative says this kind of workplace disruption is taken very seriously and asks if I feel safe, if I need any additional security measures. I'm shaking from adrenaline, but I tell her I'm okay. Just want to make sure Carol can't come back. The scene Carol made at my workplace actually helps our case because it shows her true personality when things don't go her way. Several of my coworkers witnessed the meltdown and offered to provide statements if needed. Sterling was in the lobby when it happened, and he describes Carol's performance to me later with clinical precision, noting how quickly she switched from charming to vicious, how calculated her word choices were even in the middle of a supposed emotional breakdown. He says it reminded him of a deposition he sat in on once where someone was trying to appear unstable to avoid accountability, but couldn't quite commit to the act. My manager calls me into her office to check on me and mentions that she's dealt with similar situations before, that the company has resources available if I need them. She also notes that the security footage clearly shows Carol as the aggressor and me staying calm and professional, which matters if this escalates further. By the end of the day, the incident has circulated through my department, and people I barely know are stopping by my desk to ask if I'm all right. The support is unexpected and genuinely helpful. It makes the whole thing feel less isolating. Donald Larson files for legal separation on Dad's behalf the following week, and includes documentation of financial exploitation. The filing includes copies of Carol's previous marriage and divorce records, bank statements showing the transfers to Megan's accounts, credit card charges Dad didn't authorize, and the timeline of her pattern across 4 marriages. Donald also includes Megan's text messages and sworn statement about Carol's coaching and manipulation tactics. The filing is detailed and damning. Carol hires an aggressive attorney who immediately starts making threats about defamation and harassment. Her lawyer sends letters demanding Dad retract the accusations and pay Carol a settlement for emotional distress, threatening a countersuit if he doesn't comply. Donald expected this and has responses prepared for each threat. He points out that truth is a defense against defamation, and that everything in the filing is documented with evidence Carol can't dispute. The legal back and forth begins in earnest, with both sides exchanging demands and evidence. Donald warns Dad this could take months to resolve and get expensive, but Dad says he doesn't care about the cost anymore. He wants Carol held accountable, and he wants to make sure she can't do this to anyone else. Eve called me 2 days after the separation filing went through. She said someone had reached out to her after seeing Carol's name in some legal documents that were filed with the court. The woman's name was Coraline French, and her father had been married to Carol about 12 years ago. Coraline wanted to talk to me about her family's experience and had documentation that might help Dad's case. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. Coraline showed up right on time carrying a thick folder under her arm. She was probably in her early 30s with tired eyes that suggested she'd been through something difficult. We ordered coffee and found a quiet corner booth away from other customers. She opened the folder and spread out papers across the table between us. Marriage certificates, bank statements, credit card bills, divorce papers. The pattern was exactly what Eve had found with Carol's other marriages. Coraline explained that her mother died when she was 16, and her father met Carol about 6 months later. Carol moved in within 3 months and brought her daughter Megan, who was around 8 years old at the time. Coraline said Carol was sweet at first, always asking about her day and offering to help with homework. But things changed fast once the wedding happened. Carol started suggesting that Coraline's things were taking up too much space, and maybe she should move to the smaller bedroom, so Megan could have the bigger one with the attached bathroom. Her father agreed because Carol said it would help Megan adjust to the new family. Coraline showed me bank statements that tracked money leaving her father's accounts in increasing amounts over 3 years. Small transfers at first, then bigger ones. Credit cards opened in her father's name that he didn't know about until the bills started coming. A home equity loan that Carol said was for renovations, but the house never got fixed. By the time Coraline's father caught on, he'd lost over $100,000. When he confronted Carol about the money, she packed up and left within a week. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Coraline's father tried to pursue legal action, but Carol had been careful to get his signature on most things, even if she'd lied about what the documents were for. The lawyer said it would be hard to prove fraud when he'd technically authorized the transactions. Her father gave up after spending another $10,000 on legal fees with no results. Coraline said she'd always wondered if Carol did this to other people, and when she saw the court filings with Carol's name, she knew she had to reach out. She wanted her family's story on record, so maybe this time Carol wouldn't get away with it. I took photos of all her documents and thanked her for coming forward. She said she hoped it would help, and that she was sorry I'd gone through something similar with Carol and Megan. After Coraline left, I sent everything to Donald along with a message explaining who she was and what her father had experienced. He called me within an hour, sounding energized in a way lawyers get when they find the perfect evidence. He said having multiple victims with documented patterns would strengthen Dad's case significantly. Donald suggested we schedule a meeting with Dad to discuss expanding the legal action from just separation to a full civil lawsuit for fraud and financial exploitation. Dad was reluctant when we met at Donald's office the next day. He kept saying he felt stupid for being conned and didn't want everyone knowing how badly he'd been fooled. I reminded him that Carol was good at this, that she'd done it successfully to at least 3 other men before him, and if we didn't pursue consequences, she'd just find another widower to target. Donald explained that with Coraline's testimony and documentation, plus the evidence from Dad's own accounts, they had a strong case. He said Carol had a clear pattern of behavior that showed intent to defraud, not just bad financial decisions. Dad finally agreed to move forward with the civil lawsuit, but said he needed a few days to process everything before making it official. That same week, Megan started texting me asking if we could talk. I ignored the first few messages because I didn't trust her motives, but she kept trying and eventually sent a long message saying Carol was pressuring her to lie in court and she didn't want to commit perjury. She said she needed to get away from Carol but had nowhere to go. I didn't respond right away because letting Megan into my space felt wrong after everything she'd done, but Sterling pointed out that if Megan was willing to testify honestly, that would be huge for Dad's case. He also said that Megan might genuinely be trying to break free from Carol's control and deserved a chance. I called Megan and told her she could stay at my apartment temporarily, but there would be strict rules. No touching my things, no going through my stuff, no drama. She agreed immediately and showed up at my door 2 hours later with one suitcase and red eyes from crying. Setting up Megan in my guest room felt surreal. This was the person who'd made my teenage years miserable, who'd taken my college fund, who'd mocked me at every family gathering. Now she was sleeping 20 feet away from me and I was supposed to help her. I made it clear that this arrangement was temporary and conditional on her being honest with Dad's legal team. She said she understood and just kept thanking me for letting her stay. The first few days were awkward and tense. Megan stayed mostly in the guest room and we barely spoke beyond basic logistics. But I could hear her crying at night through the wall, and it made me uncomfortable because I'd spent so many years seeing her as the enemy. Sterling recommended a therapist named Kiara Bullock who specialized in family manipulation and trauma. I gave Megan the number and she made an appointment for the following week. Watching Megan start therapy and work through her guilt was harder than I expected. She'd come home from sessions looking drained and would sometimes try to apologize for specific things she'd done years ago. Part of me wanted to accept the apologies and move forward, but another part remembered every cruel thing she'd said, every belonging she'd broken, every time she'd lied to Dad about me. I had to keep reminding myself that she was both a victim of Carol's manipulation and someone who'd actively participated in making my life hell. Those two things could be true at the same time. Meanwhile, Donald's team was building the case and going through every financial document they could access. One of the paralegals found something interesting buried in Carol's email that Dad's tech guy had recovered. Apartment applications in another state dated from 2 months before Dad mentioned the adoption plan. Carol had been looking at places to move and setting up her exit strategy while simultaneously pushing Dad to adopt Megan and change his will. The discovery changed everything because it showed premeditation. Carol wasn't just taking advantage of opportunities as they appeared. She'd been actively planning the final phase of her con, setting up her next life in a new place while squeezing the last assets out of Dad. Donald said this evidence would make it much harder for Carol to claim she'd acted in good faith, or that the financial issues were just misunderstandings. The timeline proved she knew exactly what she was doing and had planned her departure while pretending everything was fine. Carol's attorney reached out trying to negotiate a settlement. She'd return some of the money in exchange for Dad dropping the fraud claims and keeping everything quiet. Donald advised strongly against accepting, because taking the settlement would prevent any criminal charges from being filed. He said Carol needed to face real consequences or she'd absolutely do this again to someone else. Dad asked what I thought, and I told him the same thing I'd said before. This wasn't just about getting his money back. It was about stopping Carol from destroying another family. He sat with that for a long time before telling Donald to reject the settlement offer and move forward with both civil and criminal charges. Donald connected Dad with the district attorney's office, and they were very interested in the case. The DA said Carol's pattern across multiple states suggested this could be prosecuted as a larger fraud scheme, possibly even organized criminal activity. They wanted to interview all the victims and review all the financial evidence before deciding how to proceed. The next 2 months were a blur of meetings, interviews, document reviews, and legal strategy sessions. Coraline testified about her father's experience and provided copies of everything she had. 2 more of Carol's ex-husbands came forward after hearing about the case, both with similar stories of financial exploitation. Megan gave a detailed statement about Carol's coaching and manipulation tactics, including specific conversations where Carol had told her exactly how to play Dad's emotions. The DA built a case that included fraud, exploitation of vulnerable adults, theft, and forgery on some of the financial documents. 3 months after the initial confrontation at the coffee shop, Carol was arrested at her new apartment in another state. The bail was set at $50,000 because she was considered a flight risk with connections in multiple states and a pattern of disappearing when confronted. Her family couldn't post bond immediately, so she spent a week in county jail before someone finally paid. Dad called me when he heard about the arrest and his voice was shaking. He said he felt relieved and sick at the same time. Relieved that Carol was facing consequences, but sick that he'd let it go on for so long. I told him that Carol was a professional and he shouldn't blame himself for being targeted by someone who'd perfected this con over years. He said he appreciated that, but still felt like he should have seen it sooner, should have listened when I tried to warn him 8 years ago. I didn't disagree with him. Megan sat in the witness chair looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The grand jury room had those high ceilings that made everything echo, and she kept twisting her hands together while the prosecutor asked questions. She confirmed that Carol had coached her on exactly what to say to Dad, how to play up the differences between their house and her biological father's place, how to make Dad feel like he needed to prove himself. The prosecutor asked if Carol had ever discussed targeting widowers specifically. Megan nodded and explained that Carol would scan obituaries and attend grief support groups looking for men with money and young children who needed a mother figure. She described conversations where Carol mapped out timelines, calculated how long it would take to access accounts, and planned exit strategies before even meeting the targets. Her voice got quieter when she admitted Carol had told her that men who'd lost their wives were easy because they were desperate for someone to fill the empty space. The prosecutor asked about the college fund, and Megan confirmed she'd known the money came from my mother's life insurance, but Carol said I didn't deserve it because I was ungrateful and cold. She testified that Carol had opened accounts in Megan's name specifically to hide assets and had transferred money in small amounts to avoid triggering bank alerts. The session lasted 3 hours, and when Megan came out, she looked exhausted. I was waiting in the hallway because the prosecutor said my presence might help her stay focused on telling the truth. She walked past me without making eye contact, and I didn't try to stop her. 2 weeks later, Donald called to say the grand jury had voted to indict. Carol was charged with 6 counts of fraud, 4 counts of exploitation of vulnerable adults, and 3 counts of theft. The DA explained that the multiple counts covered different victims and different time periods, and if convicted on all charges, Carol could face up to 15 years in prison. Donald said Carol's attorney immediately started pushing for a plea deal because the evidence was overwhelming, and going to trial would be risky. The attorney wanted to negotiate down to probation and restitution with no jail time. The DA's office asked what Dad wanted, and he said he needed to think about it. He called me that night, and we talked for over an hour about whether prison time would actually accomplish anything, or if it was just revenge. I told him it wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure Carol faced real consequences so she'd think twice before doing this to someone else. He agreed, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Dad started asking to meet for coffee every week. Not to talk about the legal case, but just to talk. The first time he asked about my actual job instead of just acknowledging I worked in finance. I explained that I analyzed investment portfolios and helped clients restructure their assets for better returns. He asked questions about specific projects and seemed genuinely interested when I described a complicated corporate merger I'd worked on. It felt strange having him pay attention to my life after so many years of being invisible. He wanted to know about my apartment, about my friends, about whether I was dating anyone. I kept my answers short at first because I didn't trust that his interest would last. But he kept showing up every week and kept asking questions, and slowly I started sharing more details about my actual life. The 4th week, he admitted he didn't really know me as an adult. He said he'd checked out of my life when I was 17, and he'd missed everything important that happened after. He asked how I'd managed working 3 jobs during college, and I told him about the overnight shifts at the campus library, the weekend catering gigs, and the summer internships that barely paid enough to cover textbooks. He asked what it was like watching Megan post sorority photos funded by money that should have been mine. I told him it felt like watching someone wear my mother's face as a mask, living the life I was supposed to have while I scraped by on ramen and student loans. He asked about graduation, and I described sitting in the audience watching other families celebrate while I knew he was at Megan's recital. His face went gray when I told him I'd cried in the bathroom afterward because I felt so completely alone. He asked about the dean's list announcements he'd never acknowledged, and I showed him screenshots I'd saved of every academic achievement I'd posted that he'd scrolled past without comment. He looked at each one, and I watched him realize exactly how thoroughly he'd erased me from his life. I told him about the nights I'd worked until 3 a.m, then dragged myself to 8 a.m. classes. I described the time I'd gotten sick during finals week but couldn't afford to see a doctor, so I just pushed through with a fever. I explained how I'd watched my roommates go home for holidays while I picked up extra shifts because I couldn't afford the plane ticket and knew I wasn't welcome at his house anyway. He asked why I'd never told him how hard things were, and I reminded him that I'd tried, that I'd called during my sophomore year, asking if there was any way to access even part of the college fund, and Carol had answered and said I was being manipulative and trying to guilt him. He didn't remember that conversation. I told him that was the problem, that he'd let Carol rewrite reality so many times he couldn't tell what was true anymore. He sat there looking at his coffee and said he didn't know how to fix any of it. I told him he couldn't fix it, that those years were gone and nothing would bring them back. Dad asked what he could do to make things right. I told him there was no magic solution for 8 years of damage. He couldn't give me back the college experience without crushing debt where I actually had time to join clubs and make friends instead of working every spare hour. He couldn't give me back the graduation where my father showed up and was proud of me. He couldn't undo choosing Megan over me 1,000 times in ways both big and small. He couldn't return the college fund that would have let me start my career without $40,000 in student loans. He couldn't erase the years of feeling erased and replaced and worthless. I watched him absorb each thing he couldn't undo and saw the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He asked if there was anything at all he could do, and I told him he could start by being my father now, today, and proving through his actions that he meant it. Not grand gestures or throwing money at the problem, just consistently showing up and actually seeing me. He said he would try to. I told him trying wasn't enough, that I needed commitment and follow through because I was done accepting scraps of his attention. Donald recommended we work with a mediator to establish clear boundaries and expectations. The mediator was a woman in her 50s who specialized in family reconciliation, and she didn't let either of us hide behind vague promises or deflections. I told Dad that rebuilding trust would take years, not months, and that every time he chose comfort over honesty or avoided difficult conversations, he'd be setting us back to zero. The mediator asked what specific actions would demonstrate commitment, and I listed things like responding to my calls and texts within a reasonable time frame, remembering important dates without me reminding him, asking about my life without me having to volunteer information first, and never comparing me to Megan, or suggesting I should be more understanding of Carol's situation. Dad agreed to all of it, and the mediator made him repeat back what he'd heard to make sure he actually understood. We scheduled monthly check-ins with the mediator to assess progress and address problems before they became crises. I made it clear that if he backslid into old patterns, I would walk away and not give him another chance. He said he understood, and the mediator noted it in her file. Carol's attorney negotiated a plea deal that avoided trial. She pled guilty to 4 counts of fraud and 2 counts of exploitation in exchange for the other charges being dropped. The deal included $60,000 in restitution paid over 5 years, 3 years of probation, and 6 months in county jail with credit for time served. She was also prohibited from contacting Dad or me for the duration of her probation. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for the following month. Dad called me after the hearing and said it felt like partial justice, but not enough, that 6 months seemed like nothing compared to 8 years of manipulation and theft. I agreed, but told him that Carol would have a criminal record now, that future victims could find it if they looked, and that sometimes partial justice was all you got. He said he'd hoped for more, and I reminded him that hope was what got him into this situation in the first place. He went quiet, and then admitted I was right. Megan decided to stay in town instead of following Carol to wherever she ended up after jail. She told Dad she wanted to keep working with her therapist to understand how Carol's manipulation had shaped her entire worldview. She got a job waiting tables at a restaurant downtown and started paying Dad back small amounts toward the college fund. He told her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted, saying she needed to take responsibility for benefiting from money that wasn't meant for her. The first payment was $50, and she handed it to him in cash with an apology. Dad tried to refuse, but she left it on his kitchen counter and walked out. The next month, she brought another $50. I didn't know how to feel about Megan's attempts at restitution because $50 a month wouldn't make a dent in what was taken, but I could see she was trying to do something concrete instead of just apologizing. Dad asked if I thought he should accept the money, and I told him that was between him and Megan, that I wasn't going to weigh in on their relationship anymore. Dad put his house on the market 6 weeks after Carol's sentencing. He said the place had never felt like home after Carol moved in, that she'd changed everything about it until none of Mom's presence remained. He wanted to start over somewhere that didn't have Carol's fingerprints all over it. The house sold quickly, and he bought a smaller condo across town with big windows and a view of the park. He called and asked if I'd help him decorate it, specifically asking what Mom would have liked. I met him at the empty condo, and we walked through the rooms talking about Mom's taste in furniture and colors. She'd loved deep blues and warm woods, plants everywhere, and lots of natural light. We spent the afternoon looking at furniture online, and I showed him photos of Mom's favorite things from our old house before Carol changed everything. He saved each photo and said he wanted to honor Mom's memory in his new space. We ordered a couch in navy blue and a coffee table made of reclaimed wood. He asked about plants, and I told him Mom had loved ferns and succulents. We went to a nursery the following weekend and filled his car with green things that needed care and attention. He said taking care of something living might be good for him, and I agreed. 4 months turned into a routine that felt strange at first. Dad would show up at my apartment every Thursday at 6, carrying grocery bags with ingredients for whatever recipe he'd found online that week. The first few dinners were awkward and quiet, with both of us focusing too hard on chopping vegetables or stirring sauce to avoid talking about anything real. But slowly the silences got less uncomfortable, and the conversations started flowing more naturally. He asked about my projects at work, and actually listened when I explained the complicated financial models I was building. I told him about the promotion I was up for, and he asked follow-up questions instead of changing the subject to talk about Megan. We burned the chicken the second week and ordered pizza instead, laughing about how Mom used to set off the smoke alarm at least once a month. The third week I showed him how to make her lasagna recipe from memory, and he got quiet when he took the first bite and said it tasted exactly like he remembered. By the 6th week, we'd established a rhythm where he'd handle the main dish and I'd make the sides, and we'd talk about everything from the office politics to whether we should try growing tomatoes on my balcony. There were still painful moments when he'd mention something from the years we'd lost, and I'd feel that familiar anger rising in my chest. Once he started a sentence with, "Remember when Megan," and caught himself mid-word, apologizing immediately. I told him we couldn't pretend those years didn't happen, but we also couldn't let them define everything going forward. He nodded and said he was trying to figure out how to be my dad again, without erasing his mistakes or making excuses for them. Megan and I crossed paths occasionally at Dad's condo when our visits overlapped. The first time was tense, with both of us standing in his kitchen making small talk about the weather, while Dad hovered nervously nearby. She was working double shifts at the restaurant and taking online classes in accounting, trying to build something legitimate instead of coasting on other people's money. I asked her once why she stayed in town instead of starting over somewhere new where nobody knew about Carol's crimes. She said running away felt like something her mother would do and she was tired of following Carol's patterns. We weren't friends and probably never would be, but we'd reached an understanding where we could exist in the same room without hostility. She'd send me occasional texts about Dad, letting me know if he seemed down or if she thought he needed company. I'd do the same for her, mentioning when he'd asked about her classes or seemed proud of her progress. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like mutual acknowledgement that we'd both been damaged by the same person, and we were both trying to heal. I still remembered everything she'd done, every cruel comment and stolen belonging and lie she'd told. But I could see she was working hard to become someone different, and I respected the effort even though the past couldn't be erased. Dad called me on a Tuesday morning and asked if I could stop by his condo after work. His voice had that careful tone he used when he wanted to discuss something important, but wasn't sure how I'd react. I showed up around 7 and found him sitting at his kitchen table with a folder full of paperwork spread out in front of him. He said he'd been thinking about the college fund, and how he'd stolen my future to fund Megan's party years, and even though he couldn't give back what was taken, he wanted to invest in whatever came next for me. He'd opened a new education fund in my name with enough money to cover law school or a graduate program, or whatever path I wanted to pursue. I stared at the account statements showing a balance that would cover tuition and living expenses for years of advanced study. He said it wasn't about the money, really. It was about finally showing up for me the way he should have all along. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of it. For 8 years, I'd watched him pour resources and attention into Megan while treating my accomplishments like they didn't matter. Now he was putting his money where his apologies were, making a concrete investment in my future, instead of just saying sorry. I told him I'd been thinking about law school but hadn't seriously pursued it because of the debt. He said I should apply wherever I wanted and not worry about the cost, that this was his way of giving me back the opportunities he'd stolen. 6 months after everything started, I sat with Dad in his living room surrounded by boxes of old photos he'd pulled from storage. He'd packed them away after Carol moved in because she said looking at pictures of dead people were morbid and unhealthy. Now he wanted to remember Mom properly, to talk about her without guilt or Carol's voice in his head saying it was time to move on. He showed me pictures from their early dating years that I'd never seen, Mom laughing at some restaurant with her hair in a style I didn't recognize. He told me stories about their first apartment and how Mom had insisted on painting every room a different color, driving the landlord crazy. He talked about how she'd wanted to be a teacher and had volunteered at the library reading to kids even when she got too sick to work full-time. He said she would have been so proud of who I became, how I'd survived college working 3 jobs and built a successful career and exposed Carol's con to protect him even after he'd failed me so badly. I realized sitting there looking at Mom's face in those old photos that exposing Carol hadn't just been about the money or even about revenge. It had freed Dad to finally grieve properly, to remember what real love looked like instead of Carol's calculated manipulation. He'd spent 8 years with someone who saw him as a target instead of a partner, and now he could finally process Mom's death without Carol's poison in his head. Maybe that was the real victory, not the criminal charges or the restitution payments, but giving Dad back the ability to remember Mom honestly and move forward without someone exploiting his grief.